Right now, on a power line above your street, or a rooftop, or a branch at the edge of your yard, there's a decent chance a crow is watching you and has already decided what it thinks of you. That's not a dramatic exaggeration. That's an actual, documented finding from years of behavioral research. But there's a lot of wilder stuff floating around online right now about what crows can supposedly do, and it's worth separating the genuinely mind-blowing real science from the parts that have drifted into pure speculation. Let's go through this properly. For the past several years, researchers in Spain, working near the University of León, have been recording a population of carrion crows in extraordinary detail. They've placed microphones near nests and used tracking devices to capture the sounds these birds make throughout the day. What they collected was enormous, hundreds of thousands of individual vocalizations. And here's something most people don't realize. Most of what a crow actually says has nothing to do with that loud, familiar caw we all recognize. The vast majority of their communication is soft, low, murmuring sound, too quiet for the human ear to register as meaningful out in the field. For decades, that soft chatter went largely unstudied, simply because nobody had the tools to process that much sound. Then, starting in 2024, an organization called the Earth Species Project got involved. It's a US-based nonprofit that specializes in applying artificial intelligence to animal communication, and it's backed by some serious funding, including grants from tech figures like Reid Hoffman. They began working with the Spanish researchers to build AI models capable of sorting through this mountain of crow recordings. One of the tools that came out of that collaboration is called Voxaboxen, and according to the lead researchers on the project, the sheer volume of data was simply too large for any human team to sort through by hand. They needed a machine to do it. Now here's where I want to be really careful, because this is exactly the point where a lot of viral content starts stretching the truth. What the AI has actually been used for so far is categorizing and sorting crow calls, identifying which sounds seem to cluster together, which patterns repeat, which vocalizations tend to show up around similar behaviors. That is genuinely exciting, groundbreaking work. It is not the same thing as fully decoding a crow language, and it's definitely not the same as proving crows have individual names for specific humans, or that they're having strategic planning conversations about the future. Those specific claims, the ones you may have seen framed as confirmed discoveries, aren't backed by any published, peer-reviewed research I could find. They appear to be dramatic extrapolations layered on top of real, ongoing research, the kind of embellishment that spreads fast online precisely because the underlying real science is already so interesting on its own. So, let's focus on what actually is confirmed, because it turns out we don't need to exaggerate anything here. The real science is remarkable enough by itself. Start with the brain itself. For over 100 years, neuroscience operated on an assumption that turned out to be flatly wrong. Scientists believed higher intelligence required a cerebral cortex, that wrinkled outer layer of the brain that mammals, including humans, have. Birds don't have one. Their brains are smooth. So for generations, researchers looked at a bird's brain and assumed the hardware for complex thought simply wasn't there. What they missed is that evolution doesn't have just one solution to a problem. Birds evolved a completely different brain structure called the pallium. It looks nothing like a mammal's cortex, but at the cellular level, it accomplishes remarkably similar things. Inside a crow's small skull, neurons are packed at a genuinely extraordinary density. Relative to their body weight, the cognitive processing power available to a crow is comparable to that of a chimpanzee. Researchers studying corvids, the family that includes crows and ravens, have taken to calling them feathered apes. That's not a cute nickname. It's a fairly literal description of what the brain science actually shows. Now, one of the most well-documented and frequently cited findings in this entire field comes from Dr. John Marsluff's lab at the University of Washington. Marsluff wanted to test something specific. Could crows recognize individual human faces? But he didn't want to permanently mark any member of his own research team as a hated figure among the local crow population, so his team wore masks. They picked one specific distinctive mask and wore it while trapping, banding, and releasing wild crows on campus. The crows weren't harmed, but getting captured and handled was clearly stressful for them, and they reacted with aggressive calling and struggling. Then the researchers stopped wearing the mask, went back to their normal faces, and life went on. What happened next is the part that's genuinely stunning, and it's fully documented, published science. Every single time any team member put that mask back on, even years later, crows in the area would immediately start scolding, mobbing, and dive-bombing whoever was wearing it, regardless of who was actually underneath. The crows hadn't learned to recognize one specific person. They had encoded the mask's face itself as a threat. And here's the part that really changes how you think about these birds. Other crows, who had never been captured, who had never personally interacted with anyone on the research team, started responding to the mask with the exact same intensity as the crows that had the original bad experience. Young crows, born well after the original experiment ended, attacked the mask the moment they saw it. Marsluff wore the mask on campus 5 years after the initial captures. By then, most of the originally captured crows had already died of natural causes. The flock attacking the mask was made up almost entirely of birds that had never personally encountered the mask wearer at all. But they knew the face anyway. That information had to travel from one generation of crows to the next, not through instinct but through actual social communication. Older crows had, in some form, conveyed, "This face is dangerous," to their offspring and their neighbors. Clearly enough that the recognition held and the emotional urgency behind it held too. This is genuine cultural transmission of specific information, the kind of thing researchers long assumed was uniquely human. And it connects directly to what brain imaging studies have since confirmed. When a crow sees a face it associates with a past threat, multiple regions of its brain activate together, including the region equivalent to the amygdala, the part of the human brain responsible for processing fear. In other words, when a crow recognizes a dangerous face, it isn't just pulling up a visual memory. It's experiencing something measurably similar to fear, wrapped up together with the recognition itself. Let's slow down for a second on that mask experiment because I don't think the full weight of it lands the first time you hear it. Think about what actually had to happen for that result to be possible. A crow gets captured, banded, and released by a person wearing a specific mask. That crow experiences fear and stress during that encounter. Afterward, it somehow has to communicate to other crows in a form specific enough that a completely different crow, one that never saw the actual event, can later look at that exact same mask among a sea of other human faces and immediately identify it as the dangerous one. That's not a vague sense of unease being passed along. That's specific, transferable, visual information, encoded into some kind of shared reference, held onto for years, and accurately applied by an animal that wasn't even born when the original event happened. That specificity is actually one of the most important details here, and it's easy to skip past. This isn't crows being generally suspicious of anything unfamiliar. It's crows targeting one very specific, consistent visual identifier, and only that one, while ignoring other novel or strange-looking faces entirely. That level of precision is what convinced researchers this wasn't some kind of generalized startle response. It was learned, specific, and socially shared. Now back to the AI research, because this is where the confirmed science and the more speculative claims tend to blur together online, and it's worth being precise about where that line actually sits. The AI analysis of crow vocalizations has identified real structural patterns. Statistically meaningful, repeating arrangements of sound that resemble what linguists look for when they're trying to determine whether a sequence of sounds functions as structured communication rather than just noise. That is a legitimately significant finding, and it's part of why researchers in this field are increasingly cautious about assuming humans have some kind of monopoly on structured communication. What has not been established, at least not in anything I could verify through published research, is the far more specific and dramatic claim that crows have something equivalent to individual proper names for specific humans, complete with distinct acoustic signatures that vary based on whether that person is seen as a food source or a threat. That's a compelling idea, and it's not entirely implausible given everything else we know about crow cognition. But as of now, it appears to be speculation dressed up as an already confirmed discovery. The same goes for claims about crows holding structured planning, conversations about future events, or crows deliberately encrypting their communication in response to being studied by AI. Those make for a great eerie story. They just aren't backed by the research as far as anyone can currently verify. What is well documented, separately from the AI research, are what scientists have long called crow funerals. When a crow dies, another crow that discovers the body produces a specific call that draws others to the location. The gathered birds circle, watch, and vocalize, but they don't eat the body, don't fight over it, and don't disperse quickly. Sometimes they stay for extended periods. Researchers at the University of Washington who studied this behavior found that crows who attended these gatherings subsequently changed their behavior around that location and around whatever circumstances were associated with the death. Behavior consistent with the birds having extracted some kind of threat information from the event. Calling this an investigation, the way some viral content frames it, is a bit of a stretch, an anthropomorphized flourish. But the underlying behavior, gathering around a dead crow and subsequently adjusting how they act in that area, is genuinely observed and documented. There's also solid separate research on how information spreads across crow populations more broadly. Specific vocal patterns have been observed spreading between flocks over long distances, moving through overlapping territories in ways that researchers describe as resembling the spread of cultural information in human populations. So, the broad idea that crows share and update collective knowledge across a network, not just within one family group but across a wider population, does have real research behind it. Even if the more specific instant broadcast and network update framing you might see in some videos oversells how fast and precise that spread actually is. This is also a good moment to talk about tool use, because it's part of the broader body of confirmed crow research that supports just how seriously scientists now take corvid cognition, even though it's a separate line of research from the AI vocalization work. New Caledonian crows, a different species from the carrion crows in the Spanish study, have been documented in controlled experiments manufacturing tools from raw plant material, bending wire into hooks to retrieve food from tubes, and in some cases solving multi-step problems that require using one tool to obtain a second tool needed to reach a final reward. That's not instinctive behavior fixed at birth. Researchers have shown these are learned and, in some cases, individually inventive solutions, with different crows arriving at different tool designs to solve the same problem. This body of research, separate from but complementary to the communication studies, is part of why corvid cognition is treated as a serious mainstream subfield of animal behavior research rather than a fringe curiosity. It's also worth mentioning why the AI research matters beyond simple curiosity, because the applications are genuinely significant. Researchers studying the closely related Hawaiian crow, a critically endangered species that's been the subject of major conservation efforts, have used similar tools to compare current vocalizations from captive birds against historical recordings made before the population crashed. The concern is that a species raised largely in captivity, away from wild flocks, may lose parts of its vocal repertoire the way an isolated human community might lose parts of a language over generations without contact with other speakers. If that's happening, it could actually be relevant to why reintroduction efforts have struggled, because a crow that's lost the ability to communicate normally with wild-born birds might have a harder time integrating into an existing wild population. That's a very concrete, practical conservation question that this same AI technology is being used to help answer, and it's a good reminder that this research isn't purely about satisfying curiosity. It has real stakes for keeping a species alive. So, where does that leave us? Here's the honest, confirmed picture. Crows have brains built on an entirely different evolutionary path than mammals, yet they achieve cognitive density comparable to a chimpanzee. They can learn to recognize individual human faces, hold on to that recognition for years, and transmit it to crows who never had the original experience themselves, which is genuine cultural learning across generations. Their vocalizations show real evidence of structured, rule-governed patterns that researchers are only now able to analyze at scale, thanks to AI tools built specifically for this purpose. They gather around their dead in ways that appear to serve a real behavioral function. And there's early evidence that information about threats and locations spreads across wider crow populations over time. What's not yet confirmed, and deserves genuine skepticism if you see it presented as settled fact, individual names for specific humans, deliberate future planning conversations, and crows encrypting their language specifically to evade AI researchers. Those ideas make for a gripping story, but right now, they're extrapolation, not established science. And honestly, once you strip away the exaggeration, what's left is still remarkable enough to sit with. There is a bird outside your window right now, with a brain built on a completely different blueprint than yours, capable of recognizing your face, remembering it for years, and passing that memory on to birds that have never even met you. Science is only just now building the tools to start listening in on what they're actually saying to each other. We don't fully know yet how much of it we'll eventually be able to understand, but we know enough already to say this. The idea that animal communication is simple, instinctive noise, with nothing resembling real structure or memory or shared knowledge behind it, does not hold up anymore. Not for crows, at least. If you found this as fascinating as I did, let me know in the comments what you think they're actually saying about us.